You know those rare moments when you stumble across a view that just stops you in your tracks? The kind of place that feels like it's waiting for a story to unfold there. That's exactly what happened to this family one afternoon on a walk in Brindleton Bay, and it set them on a path that would change not just their home, but their whole way of living. You might notice the shape of the structure already. It's a little different, and that's because it's a container home made from steel boxes that once had other lives, lovingly repurposed into a family's new sanctuary. This home is going to have 4 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms, and the main structure you're seeing me build now will be the heart and soul of the family home. But I've also planned a few playful outbuildings, perfect for extra hobbies, skill building, and a cozy guest space. Now, I built this house with a particular family in mind, and I'll introduce them to you in just a little bit. But I also wanted to leave plenty of room for your own imagination. Maybe you'd like an art studio tucked into one of these containers, or a music room full of instruments, or even a little woodworking shed. Everything I'm creating here is easy to adapt and swap out or repurpose over time. So whether you're telling your own story or playing a long-term legacy challenge, I've tried to create a space here that can grow with you. And speaking of stories, I can't wait to introduce you to the family who will call this place home and see how their lives will unfold here in Brindleton Bay. One weekend, this family wandered up a grassy hill. The docks were bustling below, gulls circled overhead, and the lighthouse blinked quietly in the distance. From the top, the view stretched out over the water, and in that moment, they just knew this was it. This was where they wanted to build their life. But here's the thing, they didn't want to carve up the hill or flatten it into something unrecognizable. No, the hill and the amazing views it offered was what made their hearts soar. They wanted to live with the land. So they began learning about container homes and discovered how beautifully they could nestle into the slope without disturbing too much of the ground. Instead of leveling everything, the house follows the shape of the hill in these gentle tiers. It feels like a series of steps rising up with the land, so the hill stays a hill, just with a family tucked into it. If we're imagining for a second this as a real life build, then something like this would allow them to choose what's known as a pier and stilt foundation rather than pouring a giant slab of concrete. And what that means is that only a few careful points touch the earth, leaving most of the soil and the roots completely intact. And because some of the house is lifted slightly, the sea air can drift beneath it, keeping everything cool and light and airy. And maybe my personal favorite detail, on some of the rooftops, we're going to plant wildflowers and grasses, creating these green roofs that help the containers disappear into the hill. So for this family, it wasn't just about the house. It was about protecting the view that they fell in love with and letting the hillside stay as wild and alive as the first day they walked it. And so I've heard the cats and dogs of Brindleton Bay approve this spot. If you do too, it would really mean a lot if you like and subscribe so we can keep building these worlds together. Before we get too far into this build, I wanted to mention that a lot of the aesthetics you'll see throughout the home were inspired by the new Grange Mudroom kit, designed by Peacemaker. If you've seen pieces from the kit so far, I would love to hear what you think about it. Have you had the chance to try it? For me, it's such a thoughtful little kit. It's full of charm and it really fills a gap that we've had in the game, I think. Even just thinking about some of the pieces helped me shape the space that I'm building now. So if you're curious to see more of it in action, then stay tuned. What kind of family would want to live in a home like this? Well, let's keep building and discover them together. So if you're curious how I actually managed to tuck this container home into the hillside rather than just kind of plopping it on top, it really is easier than it looks, but it does take a little patience and, for me at least, a lot of trial and error. I started with the very bottom container and I built a small hill for it to nestle into. That way, instead of hovering, it felt like it was properly resting on the earth really strong strong and sturdy. Once I had that in place, I added the second container, but this time rotated it at a right angle and raised the terrain up on one side so it looked like it was being supported by the hill. I then did the same thing with a third container, so little by little they started to feel like they belonged to the landscape instead of sitting apart from it. The fourth container is my personal favorite because I balanced it right on top. So even though these are huge metal boxes, the whole stack somehow feels light, almost like it's floating above the hillside. And I think that weightlessness is what makes the whole design feel a little bit magical. But of course, as you're seeing now, the terrain alone wasn't quite enough. And that's where the debug menu comes in. If you haven't used the debug menu before, it really is a little treasure trove of hidden objects. You can access it by opening the cheat console with Control, Shift and C, and then type in bb.showHiddenObjects and then bb.showLiveEditObjects. And then in the search bar, search for debug. I filtered to the cats and dogs pack in this instance because I wanted rocks that matched Brindleton Bay's world exactly. The other thing we need to make sure we've done is to turn on the move objects cheat, which is bb.moveObjects space on. And then I could tuck those rocks around the base of the hill using the Alt key to just kind of nudge and encourage them into place. Sometimes they didn't quite behave and I'd catch one floating in midair, but after a little adjusting, we could usually fix it. And I just kept layering these rocks until the whole thing started to look like a natural cliff rather than something I'd just built. Finally, what I'm doing here is softening the rest of the terrain around the rocks, making gentle slopes where the grass meets the jagged edges of the cliff. And I think that's when it all really clicked. The containers looked anchored and strong, but the hillside also looked alive as though it had always been there. So if you're building into the hill yourself, I think the most important things to remember are start with your build, raise the terrain around it, add the right rocks from the debug menu, keep move objects on, and don't be afraid to adjust and redo things a few times. Honestly, I think it's these little mistakes, quote unquote mistakes, that make the finished build feel even more alive. If you have any questions about this process, please feel free to drop them in the comments below. I'm always happy to help. So now that we've got the nature looking good, let's talk a little bit about the materials, because before I added the metal on the container homes, I have to admit I was a little nervous. From the outside, it was looking like a giant abstract game of Jenga, all the boxes stacked at every angle just waiting to collapse. But then I started cladding each container in its own color and suddenly it all began to make sense. The playful tones helped each piece feel like it had its own personality, its own story, and the whole structure began to feel really intentional and, dare I say, even joyful. I thought about covering the containers in wood or brick to soften them, but when I saw it like this, I was thinking there's something really lovely about keeping the metal exposed. There's an honesty to it, and it feels true to the history of the containers themselves. Each little panel tells a story of travel, of docks, of life on the move, and now it's here and it's part of this home, this hillside, in this little corner of Brindleton Bay. And I just find it so interesting how sometimes the most surprising materials can turn out to be the most magical when you let them speak for themselves. And later on in the build, we're also going to explore a few other unexpected textures and reclaim materials that bring the same kind of story and charm to this home. Let's imagine you find yourself in Brindleton Bay, a sleepy coastal town where the sea mist clings to the harbour and gulls circle lazily over the docks. There's something about this space that already feels like it needs a shipping container home. After all, these containers have travelled oceans before, and here among lighthouses and piers and salty air, it feels like they've come full circle. What kind of family do you think would live here? For me, when I was building, I was imagining that this family, they were really involved in the process of this self-build. Not just in the large decisions, but also in the tiny details as well. And so their personality shines through in every single nook and cranny. The first parent, I see them as the dreamer. Maybe before this project, they had a job that was steady and safe and frankly a little boring and draining. You know the kind kind where everything runs smoothly, but your heart isn't in it? Well, during this self build, though, they found themselves sketching layouts late into the evening, mood boarding color palettes, sourcing reclaimed wood with a lot of care and attention to detail. And in that process, something changed and they discovered their calling. And today, they're working as an interior designer, specializing in cozy, eco forward spaces. And I just imagine that there's a gentle joy in every single room that they touch. This sim, they're warm and they're detail orientated and maybe a little bit whimsical as well. Have you ever met someone like that? They just seem to live by the phrase, let's see how it feels. The second parent, I think they would be the organizer, and together these two sims create the perfect balance. This sim, they're grounded and they're practical. Maybe they're a little dry humored. And I think during the project, they would always joke that they were the captain of the ship, managing the contractors and the budget, every little logistical headache that came up along the way. They were the one wrangling with electricians and plumbers and steel suppliers, making sure that their partner's vision could stand on solid ground. And I think they're really proud of their contribution to this build because they made something that at one point in time seemed impossible feel possible. And together, these two sims, they took a pile of industrial containers and turned it into a home with heart. And I think it really took both of their inputs to make this happen. I was thinking this family, they would have 3 children. The eldest is away at college and now maybe they come home at weekends or during breaks. But I think they were there during the early days of this build. So their presence is felt here as well. And for them, we're going to create this cozy little container pod apart from the main build. And we're going to turn it into this really lovely guest house. Maybe this sim, they've got their parents' eye for design and they're studying fine art or something like that. The middle child, I think it's all about creativity, and their room is going to be a symphony of posters and musical instruments. And when I was building this home, it really made me smile to imagine the sound of their musical instruments drifting up the staircase towards the main house. That just felt so lively and real to me. And then there's the youngest child, and I've lovingly named them the little ocean dreamer. They're enthusiastic and they're endlessly curious, they're full of energy, and they are happiest when they're outside. Maybe they collect seashells and they draw whales and marine life in notebooks and talk endlessly about Sulani, where they imagine themselves living surrounded by water. I think for this little sim, when they first learned that they were going to live in a shipping container, this was just the most exciting and wonderful thing for them. And I can't wait to show you their bedroom. I did something maybe a little different from what I would usually do for them because I wanted them to feel connected to the sea and the ocean when they were inside as well as when they're outside. I cannot wait to show you exactly how each member of the family finds their place and their purpose in this home. Right now, you may have noticed I'm using all sorts of random furniture pieces. And don't worry, most, if not all of these won't be staying. I know it looks a little mismatched right now. But I found that placing temporary furniture is one of the best ways to really get a feel for the space before committing to the final pieces. It helps me see the size and the scale of each room and how the Sims might move through it and how the furniture placement can guide the flow of the home. And one of my favorite things about this step is thinking about the views. When do you want that wide open vista? Maybe it's a living room looking out over the water. And then where do you want just a little tease, a peek at a garden or a hint of the ocean through a narrow window? Even the placement of a sofa or a desk, it can help me plan those moments. Another little tip that may be helpful is that I love this placeholder furniture because it lets me play around without stress. You can move things around, you can try different angles and see what feels natural or even whimsical. And sometimes the most unexpected arrangement sparks an idea that maybe I wouldn't have thought of otherwise. So while it does look a little chaotic right now, this part of the process is really about exploration and fun and imagining how this home will be lived in. It's setting the stage for the details that will make it feel complete later. And as we go, you might notice little hints of the final layout starting to peek through. For example, I've pulled pretty much everything out from the new Grange Mudroom kit just to see what I'm working with and to spark my imagination. And there was something so fun about seeing it all laid out like this. I really do like these sleek cabinets and they have a gorgeous array of colors. And I felt really excited just thinking about all the endless possibilities, all the different arrangements of these items that we could do that could potentially transform every single space we use them in. There's also quite a few lovely little clutter pieces as well that make a space feel really lived in. You could almost imagine a sim coming in, hanging up their coat, dropping their keys on the shelf and going on with their day. Just as an experiment, I tried to use as many of these pieces as I could throughout the build, and eventually I do end up using nearly all of them, including actually the new flooring and wallpapers a little later on. But here in this entry space, I chose this lovely dark green for the cabinets. This is one of my favorite colors, and here it just felt so right. It felt warm and it felt grounded, and it really helped set the tone for the rest of the house. When I say that this kit inspired so much of the build, this is exactly what I mean. It influenced the color palette, the style, and even to an extent the rhythm of how I placed other furniture and accessories. I have to admit, this level of storage gets me really excited. It would be a dream to have something like this. Everything just matches so beautifully, even down to the rug. I love this rug so much that I ended up placing it down twice just on this level. I was also trying to think of ideas for future builds where we could potentially use this kit. Maybe the cabinets could be used as built-ins around a television. Or maybe if you have a sim who is perhaps a little less tidy, the sunglasses and the keys could be left in a corner or behind a sofa, and we pretend that maybe they spend ages looking for them every time they want to go out. And I think that would be a little tip I would offer for having more fun when building in The Sims. I always tell myself, don't feel like you have to follow the intended use perfectly. It's okay to move pieces around or try them in unexpected spots or even pair them with other textures and materials just to see what sparks ideas. For me, that sense of experimentation is part of the fun, and it can lead to some really unexpected ideas. So like I say, later in the build, we're going to explore these new items again and see if they can bring personality and functionality to other spaces as well. But for now, let's move into the living room, because this is where the style of the build started to really come together for me, and I began thinking about the possibility of a mid-century industrial style. Mid-century design has always been one of my favorites. It's just so flexible and it pairs beautifully with so many other styles, whether you want to create something cozy or modern or glamorous or whimsical, and combine that with industrial elements and you get this wonderful mix of warmth and edge, historical charm with a touch of raw honesty. And it also had this fun, slightly edgy energy that spoke to artistic, unconventional living, and that felt just right for the story of this family. I see this living room as a space where our Sims can really hunker down and feel cozy, whether they're spending time together as a family or enjoying a quiet moment on their own. It's meant to be a low effort, comfortable space where you can imagine curling up with a good book or listening to records on a rainy afternoon or settling in to watch a favorite movie or TV show. And of course, there's this view. And with the light and the movement outside and the subtle hints of the harbour, it all makes the space feel really alive and connected to the world of Brindleton Bay. For the colours, I chose darker, richer tones throughout most of the room. There's something about them that just makes you feel held, wrapped up in the space and safe. It feels really grounded and secure, which I think ties back beautifully to the story of shipping containers themselves. They were designed to protect, to hold what's important, to keep things safe, and I wanted the living room to echo that same comforting sense of security. One of my favorite parts of this stage was combining furniture from a lot of different packs. Some pieces are modern and some are a little more whimsical. We even have a couple of Enchanted by Nature pieces in here. Some are mid-century and some are more industrial, and mixing them all together certainly could have felt chaotic, but instead I was really pleased with it because I think we were able to create something that was both eclectic and cohesive, a reflection of the family who'll live here and the stories that we can imagine imagine them sharing. I also tried to think about placement. How can these chairs frame the view and invite a sim to linger by a window? And that made me wonder, if you had a space like this, what would you most like to do here? Would you curl up with a book, or would you watch the sunset, or would you want to spend it with someone special? Maybe it's all of the above. I think for me, this would be a great space to listen to music and look at the view and just allow the world to slow down a little for a while. So I'm going to move on to this little cloakroom now. And sometimes I think in real life and in The Sims, it can feel practical and sensible to make all the bathrooms match, have the same fixtures, the same cabinetry, creating a sense of cohesion throughout the home. But I really felt that our Sims would not have done that. They would see each and every space as a chance to explore and create and have a little fun. So this first bathroom is a small powder room, and I decided to go mostly monochrome here, mostly black and white, which isn't something I usually do. Normally I gravitate towards softer, more similar tones because strong contrast I think can feel tiring to the eye sometimes. But in this little space, I wanted to challenge myself and see how a high contrast palette could work. To soften things a little, I add some wood paneling, which was my attempt to warm the space and keep it feeling cozy rather than stark. The only splash of color in here comes from a series of 3 small paintings that we put down on this wall, each with a hint of their own tone. And I really loved how the monochrome palette let those colors really pop and draw the eye to them. It is a tiny room, but it has personality and charm and a little bit of playful surprise as well, just like the rest of this home. Now, come along with me up this first staircase to the kitchen, which turned out to be one of my favorite parts of the whole build. I love the scale of it. It isn't too small and it's not huge. It hits the perfect balance of functional, cozy, and comfortable without feeling overwhelming. I did lean into a more industrial style for this space, which I love because it has a certain honesty and edge, just like the exterior of the build. The steel and the concrete and the exposed wood give the kitchen durability and character, but I wanted to make sure that it didn't feel cold. I think sometimes people are concerned that industrial aesthetics can feel cold, so I softened these materials with these lovely brick walls, which I hoped would add texture and warmth and interest. I think these Sims were trying to say that industrial doesn't have to equal stark. When I was trying to design this space, a few key ideas came to my mind. I wanted to make sure we included enough counter space for prep, but not so much that it becomes wasted surface. So I added this island peninsula that doubles as a workspace and a casual dining area. And I thought this would be just so perfect for a little snack or a cup of tea, maybe a place to hang out and have a conversation while another Sim is cooking, maybe a little homework spot for the children. I also wanted to consider storage, so we do have the upper and the lower cabinetry, but I also added a little pantry just for some extra storage. This space is not just practical for food and maybe those larger appliances that you don't want to always have out, but it's also a great spot to tuck away all that clutter and hide the rubbish bin and those kind of functional pieces as well. My goal was to keep the kitchen feeling open and inviting. I was also trying to consider how this kitchen should feel compared to the rest of the house. So while the living room downstairs feels calm and cozy and a space to relax, the kitchen is brighter and lighter. It's energizing, it's a social space, it's a dynamic space, it's an entertaining space. I wanted it to feel like somewhere where your Sims can be on the move, cooking, chatting, maybe sharing a quick laugh over coffee. And particularly in industrial builds, I think it's the little personal touches that can make all the difference. For example, I tried my best to create a custom pendant light over the island, using these lights from the Eco Living Pack and positioning them at slightly different angles and resizing some of them with the bracket keys to make them feel like a one-of-a-kind rewind feature. If you haven't done this before, you can use the left bracket and the right bracket keys on your keyboard to either size objects up or size them down. And I think it's little details like this that bring warmth and whimsy and life to the space and remind me that this is a home within the context of the game for real Sims with real personalities. And speaking of personality, this little space between the two staircases might just be one of the family's more indulgent touches. Here, I decided to put a tiny nectar and drink room, imagined as a spot which they could keep just a touch cooler than the rest of the house, perfect for tastings and for little experimentations with flavor. And I really loved how it was both visually interesting and playful, and how it gave our Sims a space to explore a hobby and a passion. It also gave me an opportunity to play with the new glass wallpapers that we got in the base game update recently in a different way to anything that I've done with them before. And I love how it made this visually different space its own little nook, whilst also integrating it into the wider room as well. I honestly love it because it transformed the whole room into something lively and bright and a little unexpected. I think it also works wonderfully just in a practical sense, filling the gap between the stairs with something cozy and usable. I could just picture the parents enjoying this space with friends, sharing a laugh or comparing notes on a new batch and making it a real conversation starter when guests come over. I'd love to know if you had a tiny space like this in one of your Sims homes, what would you do with it? Would you create a tasting nook as well, or would you imagine something completely different? Tiny corners can sometimes be the most exciting to decorate because they almost force us to get creative, and I'd be really curious to hear your ideas. Speaking of gathering, this little nectar room got me thinking about the spaces where the family really comes together. While this nook is perfect for small, intimate moments, just a few steps away lies the dining room, a place for larger meals and celebrations and all the laughter and storytelling that happens when the whole family and their friends are gathered. So as we move into the dining room, you'll see how the playful, cozy touches from the smaller spaces carry over here, but on a grander scale. I cannot wait to show you the little details I added here that hint at both comfort and a sense of occasion. Details that I really hoped would make every meal feel like more than just a dinner. So as we dive in, I want to share a little secret about this dining room. A special feature in my mind that ties to the backstory of the home and connects the industrial charm of the container house with the warm, inviting vibe we're going for, and it centers around this table. Now this table, it might look polished and new, but I like to imagine that it has a past. Maybe it had a life as part of the docks below, and our Sims were able to reclaim the wood and give it a new life up here. So this table, it carries with it a sense of history and depth and character. It reminded me that even in a new home, echoes of the past can live on, and thinking about that story, coming up with these ideas, it shaped how I arranged everything in the room. The chairs and the lighting and even the decor. For example, I added this gears rug, which is from the Vintage Glamour Stuff pack, to bring a touch of industrial charm into this otherwise really quite glamorous space. And I really loved how it adds just a hint of edge while still feeling perfectly at home here. I then also added these lovely decorative touches, like these gorgeous pots and vases, to make the space feel alive and warm and ready for the family to gather and celebrate and just make memories here. I don't know about you, but when I think about happy times with my family, especially the older generations of my family, so many of them are centered around a dining table, and I think it's those kind of memories that our Sims are going to make here as well. As a little side note, you might notice that in a lot of the spaces we're creating here, I'm combining dark brown and black in the color palette, and that is totally intentional. I remember when I was younger, people used to say that these two colors didn't belong together. Like, for example, if you wore brown shoes with black jeans, it was a big no-no. And so for years, I just avoided it. I don't know if you've ever been told something similar about colors, but as I got older, I started to question these so-called rules. And I realized that, it really just comes down to personal taste. And for me, dark brown and black can actually feel so rich and grounded together and bring a really unexpected harmony to a space. It's kind of like, I remember people saying things like blue and green should never be seen. That was something that people just used to say. And I remember thinking, but look at nature, green trees against the bright blue sky on a warm summer day. That is just one of my favorite things. And if it works in nature, well, why not in design? So I just wanted to share that because these little acts of gentle rebellion in building and decorating, they're tiny, but they're joyful ways to make a space feel personal, alive, and a little more magical. So, whilst I was talking, you'll see that we've moved upstairs and we're looking at the primary bathroom and closet. The parents' primary suite covers most of this top container, and I really wanted it to feel like a true, safe, and personal retreat with maybe just a hint of luxury as well to make it a little bit special. So, this room here, this is going to be the primary bathroom, and I wanted it to feel like a space that really has it all. It's cozy, but it's functional and it's a little indulgent. There's a freestanding tub for soaking, a private toilet room, a double vanity with plenty of storage, and some small charming touches, some candles, some soaps, a houseplant, just the little things that make a space feel lived in and personal. There's also a large walk-in shower, which I designed to echo the glass treatment we used in the nectar room. I love the sense of repetition between the two containers. It quietly and subtly brings consistency and comfort to the home. For the finishes, this is where I brought in the Grange Mudroom kit flooring and wallpaper. I just think they're so pretty. And because the flooring was originally meant for a mudroom, it also has this reassuring durability that I think our Sims would really appreciate. It also inspired the color palette in here too. I ended up going with a mix of greens and blacks that felt soothing and dynamic at the same time. And later on, I even add a few red accents, these little pops of color that draw the eye without overpowering the space. I really wanted this bathroom to feel light, so I experimented with what I'm calling as a custom window along the top, where I layered and overlapped long thin window panels to let in natural light while still keeping a sense of privacy in this space. And of course, these wall lights from the Grange Mudroom kit made a perfect addition here. Honestly, these lights are just so versatile. I ended up using them in several other spaces throughout the home too. One idea I did experiment with at one point was using a platform to raise the entire floor level of this container, and then we could have a step down into the shower, and I loved that idea. I thought it would add depth, quite literally, but also practicality as well to stop flooding and leaking and things like that. But unfortunately, it did complicate things with the doors and windows. Some of them ended up sticking out the top of the container, so I decided in the end to keep everything on one level. Sometimes simplicity wins. Little moments of luxury were going to be so important for this space. Above the bath, one of my favorite moments is when I placed this upcycled maritime pendant light from the Cats and Dogs pack as another little nod to the home's history and its location down on the docks of Brindleton Bay. The freestanding tub sits under a window, surrounded by soft clutter like scented candles and this small houseplant, which is also from the Grange Mudroom kit. I also tried playing with mood by giving the toilet and the shower room darker walls and floors. One little design tip that I really love when you have two spaces that are distinct and separate but maybe joined in some way, like by an arch or a window, is swapping the main color and the secondary color. So for example, in the main bathroom, this nice light green would be the main color and black would be the secondary color. But in the toilet room and the shower room, black ends up being the main color. And I think what this does is it allows the spaces to feel connected but also distinct as well. And I think sometimes we're told that little spaces should be a light color to make them feel bigger, and that is definitely a choice, but I think sometimes it can be really fun to do the opposite, to make them really dark, because that does something completely different to our senses. It's almost like the room is a metaphorical weighted blanket. It can make them feel cozy and safe and warm. So this long skinny room, this is the primary closet, and I wanted it to feel again both luxurious and practical, and a space that's really a joy to use every day. I started off, you might have seen, using the modular closet pieces from the Dream Home Decorator kit, but in the end I switched them out for the Grange Mudroom kit pieces instead, and the main reason for this was to get ample storage in here, organized with a variety of shelves and drawers and hanging areas that make everything easy to reach and make everyday life just a little bit easier. And I think these pieces filled the space beautifully. One of my favorite moments is this bench under the window here. It really feels like every inch of this primary closet was used effectively. There's no wasted space in here. I also added a few personal touches, shoes, bags, little accessories I imagined this family would love, bringing the space to life. And I made sure to keep the flow open. It's got this central line going all the way through from the bedroom to the bathroom, so everything feels accessible with clear pathways. This room here, this is the primary bedroom, and I wanted it to feel like a real retreat, a place where you can breathe, recharge, and sink into comfort. I used rich, saturated colors and natural materials like wood to make it feel warm and grounded, giving the space a sense of calm and coziness. You can probably tell I get so excited about this particular space. I think one of the reasons for that is that even though it's flooded with natural light from this huge window, it still feels private being up so high. You get beautiful views over the docks below, and there's also a balcony door in here that invites the sea breeze in, connecting the room to the outdoors. My favorite spot in this room is this little reading nook tucked up by the window. It is the perfect corner to curl up with a book, soak in the view, or maybe just to pause for a few quiet moments. It's a small touch, but I think it makes the space feel really lived in and restorative, somewhere where our Sims can feel truly at home. Leading into the bedroom, there's this little hallway, and I didn't want to look over this space. I wanted to make it more than just a transitional room. I think hallways can so often get overlooked, but they are such a fun place to play with ideas. So here I tried something new, and I used shape to bring in a bit of character. I started off with these playful circular wall lights, and then added behind them the bold triangular wallpaper, and then the rectangles of the windows and the doors. Altogether, I was trying to create this quiet rhythm as you walk through, almost like the space is guiding you towards the bedroom. So I'm curious, if you had to pick a favorite moment in here, would it be circular lights, triangle wallpaper, or rectangular windows? Which shape team are you on? And because I wanted it to feel not only beautiful but also practical, I tucked a laundry room up here. It just felt so right. If you're going to have a big closet like this, it makes total sense. And sometimes it's those simple conveniences that can make a home feel truly cared for. While the parents are tucked away at the very top, I decided to place the kids' bedroom all the way down on the lowest floors. And honestly, I kind of love this choice. It gives them their own little world down here, a cozy hideaway that feels adventurous, almost like a secret den. It also keeps things a little bit quieter for everyone, with some nice distance between bedtime and the busier living spaces upstairs. Of course, it is a lot of stairs for these kids between them and their parents. But for me, the positives far outweigh the negatives, especially as these children, I imagine they're getting a little older now. Maybe they're teenagers or they're preteens. And even though we are down low here, there is good light coming in and there's plenty of room to play. And it just feels like the perfect space for children to grow and to imagine and to make it their own. So what do you think? Would you have loved your bedroom on the very bottom floor as a child? Or would you rather be up and closer to everyone else? Even though this floor isn't technically a basement, it really has that cozy basement vibe to it. And I love that. Because it's tucked into a hillside, it feels so nestled, like you're being wrapped up in the landscape itself. There's something kind of adventurous about it too, like a secret space that only the younger generation get to claim as their own. I really wanted to reflect that separate zone feeling as I worked on the hallway down here, and Oh my goodness, it definitely brought me a few challenges. I was determined to use this bold blue tile because I thought, how fun would it be to have something colorful and durable and full of personality right where these kids come trunching through? And then came the lighting experiments. I tried a few different fixtures, switching them in and out. Sometimes it felt too moody, sometimes too clinical, and honestly, I wasn't sure where it was heading for a while. But that's the joy of building, right? It's little trials and errors, then suddenly, out of nowhere, things start to click. I cannot wait to show you what we ended up with in the end because, to be honest, it even surprised me a little bit. It's so strange how sometimes the spaces that fight us the most end up being the most rewarding in the end. So, this lovely space, this will be the youngest child's room. They're the ones I'm calling the little ocean dreamer of the family. They're endlessly curious, they're happiest when they're outdoors. They're always talking about how they're going to be a marine biologist one day, like it's the only thing in the world that makes sense for them. And so I wanted their bedroom to feel like a gentle underwater sanctuary. We've got this glowing fish tank and the ocean blues that wrap around the walls. It's almost like the sea itself has crept inside to keep them company. For them, living near the water is such an inspiration. Every single day, the sea is right there to remind them who they are and who they might become. The Grange Mudroom kit also had another little moment in this space. I tucked this cabinet into this little nook and then using the Alt key, I pulled it out slightly so that it would sit flush against the wall, almost like a proper built-in. And this room became a little bit of an experiment because I love tone-on-tone design. And so I thought, why not try it here? If you haven't seen before, tone on tone basically means layering different shades and tints of the same color, which creates this subtle textured look without adding too much contrast. It's often used in fashion or more refined interiors, but I thought, wouldn't it be fun to see what happens if we try it in a child's room? So in this space, I played with all sorts of ocean blues to make this child think of soft waves, deep seas, sparkling shallows. It's a nod and a homage to that under the sea feeling I think they would love, but I didn't want to tip into cartoonish. Instead, I tried to give them something that they can grow into, a space that can gently shift with them as they become a teenager. But that being said, I did want to keep it playful too. So their bed is tucked up on this platform away behind the fish tank, almost like they're floating on the water as they drift off to sleep. And I added these little adventurous touches too, model boats, captain's wheels, just enough to spark that sense of imagination and travel without overwhelming the calm. I'd love to know what you think. Do you like tone on tone spaces or do you prefer contrasting colors? And now for the siblings room, which turned out quite different from our little ocean dreamer. Honestly, this one took me a few tries to get right. Team rooms in The Sims are tricky, aren't they? They can so easily look like a child space, or they can go too far the other way and feel like a grown adult lives there. But I really wanted this to land in that in-between place, that messy, wonderful middle ground that is being a teenager. So this sim, they're all about creativity, and I wanted their room to be practically humming with it. Posters, guitars, a keyboard. While I was decorating this space, I kept thinking of them as someone who is just finding their voice, both musically and personally. Maybe they're in love with folk music, maybe even a little bit of a modern day hippie. I was chuckling to myself, imagining that a Bob Dylan song might have been the very first thing they ever learned to strum on that guitar. So to capture that feeling, I leaned into a soft but playful palette, greens, oranges, and grays. To me, these colors feel creative without being overwhelming. There is little pops of colors and fun textures to make the space feel alive, but there's also this gentle mid-century nod running through the room, almost like they inherited a sense of design from their parents. It's playful, but it has purpose, and it's a safe little nest for their creative spirit to grow. One of my favorite things that I did in here was using the move object cheat to raise and lower some of these small decorative pieces onto this shelf here. If you want to do this too, you can do this with the 9 and the 0 keys, and then holding Alt to nudge them exactly where you want them. For this sim in particular, I imagined those shelves were holding items with deep sentimental value, mementos, little handmade projects, maybe things that give comfort and remind them of who they really are. And then there's the lighting. I kept it soft and playful in here, a balance of cozy and inspiring, because when you're a creative teenager, sometimes you need brightness for those bursts of inspiration at 2 in the morning, and sometimes you just need a warm glow to curl up under while you're strumming your guitar and dreaming about what comes next. So yes, it took a bit of perseverance to land on this design, but in the end, it feels like it really belongs to them. A room that doesn't take itself too seriously, but takes its role as a creative sanctuary very seriously indeed. Now, I'm starting to map out the kids' bathroom, just placing a few pieces here and there, just to get the feel of the space. And even at this early stage, the layout is almost exactly what we end up with. I love how that little nook works perfectly for the shower, don't you think? And I don't worry too much about the final details just yet. I don't know if this ever happens to you, but sometimes when I'm building, my heart will just start calling me to decorate another area first. And experience has told me that's something you should always listen to. So I leave this for the time being and go somewhere else first. I would love to hear from you. When you're building your own sim spaces, do you start with the room that excites you the most, or do you like to work methodically from one end to the other? You know, when I first started planning this home, one of the biggest choices was how to use containers not just for the main living area, but also as separate spaces for different activities. In total, this home uses 7 containers, 4 big ones for the main house, and then 3 smaller, separate containers tucked elsewhere on the property. And each of the smaller containers has its own purpose: a gym, a home office for our interior design sim, and a lovely little guest house. So we're going to start with the home office, and I gave myself permission in this space to really let a little of my own personality shine through and create a space that feels like my own dream office. So I went for soft greens and gentle pinks and lovely calm grays, all coming together to make a space that's relaxing but also ready for work. I added a cozy chair and this bookshelf so that there's room for quiet reading or brainstorming, and created these 2 distinct zones where our sim could study or work. You could even imagine clients popping by here to chat about their dreams for their own home. It really is the kind of space that encourages ideas to bloom. And one of my favorite unexpected things about this office is its little hidden perks, because it's tucked into the hill and surrounded by flowers, and it feels private and connected to nature, almost like a little secret tucked just steps away from the main house. And it gave me the chance to solve a very practical problem too, creating a small zone to hide the rubbish bins. You know, I always forget about this, and I'm always trying to sneak these practical touches in at the very end of the build, so it felt very satisfying to plan it right from the start. By surrounding it with flowers, I hoped not only to make it pretty, but to also soften any of those less charming smells that might come from such an area. I also loved how having this separate container adds a little pause between the home office and the main living space. It gives the family some quiet separation when they need to focus, but also keeps everything very visually connected with the flowers and the walkways. I can imagine stepping out onto the grass to stretch between tasks. It feels like a space made for gentle productivity and inspiration. You'll see, I ended up covering this whole hill and even part of the other side with these beautiful flowers. You'll see right now they're in these lovely soft purples and pinks, but I do change this palette later to warmer tones. We go for rich oranges and sunny yellows and deep reds, and I think it adds so much color and life, and it really helps disguise that bare hill behind. The flowers make the home office feel completely nestled into the landscape. There really is something so comforting about how the garden wraps around this container. And just a few steps away up on the hill is the guest house. I really love that it's separate from the main home. It gives visitors their own cozy retreat while still feeling connected to the family's world. This little space also has the most amazing view, by the way. So perfect for morning coffee or watching the sun dip below the horizon. I can't wait to show you later how it's going to look when it's almost cradled by the strong rocks on one side, as if the landscape itself is holding it in place. And then down beside the guest house, tucked into the base of the hill, is the gym container. I also love having this space separate from the main home. It gives our Sims room to move and stretch and focus without distractions, while again feeling very connected and cohesive with the overall layout of the property. You can imagine throwing open the double doors and letting in the cool breeze. How wonderful would that be during a workout? Putting on some great music and having a wonderful time working out in here. It is a practical space, yes, but it's also one that invites creativity and fun and play. And who says that a gym can't be beautiful as well? So whilst I'm fiddling around with a few bits and pieces, I wanted to quickly mention the new Essential Glam kit that just came out this week. This one is by the content creator Cryptic Sim, and I haven't got my hands on it yet. But from what I've seen, it really does look so lovely. It looks like it's designed really well to give your Sims more ways to express themselves with makeup, whether that's with subtle, everyday looks, or with bold, smoky eyes, or with a soft lip gloss, and all kinds of little details in there. I would love to hear what you think. Are you planning to try this kit? Have you already tried this kit? Would you recommend it to other Simmers? My initial thoughts, and this is just from looking at screenshots and from watching other YouTube videos, but it looks like it's going to be such a fun way to add personality and detail to our Sims. But I would really love to hear your thoughts on that in the comment section below. I love the idea of having these spaces separated from the main house because it creates distinct zones of focus and energy. The gym, for example, is a space where the Sims can really move and be active without worrying too much about disrupting the quieter areas of the home. The home office, on the other hand, has its own calm, private setting, perfect for concentration and inspiration, letting our creative Sim step away from the household noise and fully immerse in their work. And the guest house, that offers a cozy, welcoming space for friends or visiting family, tucked away but still very much part of the property. Using separate containers in this way gives the family flexibility and privacy without actually isolating anyone. The main house remains the heart of the home, the living room, the kitchen, the dining areas, the bedrooms, but these smaller pods create opportunity for individual pursuits and hobbies, and they work while keeping the main areas uncluttered. I also love how it let me think of the outdoor space differently. We're going to have pathways, little terraces, and playful landscaping that makes the journey between the spaces feel like a small adventure. So my decision was to make a gym, a home office, and a guest house, but I would love to hear, what would you want to do with these separate containers? Would you turn one into a photography studio or a games room or maybe a little sauna space? I hadn't considered that. But honestly, there is just so much potential, and I think imagining what could go into each one is half the fun. I wanted this guest house to feel really welcoming and complete, somewhere that our visitors can feel really at home while still having their own independence. I leaned really heavily into the Dream Home Decorator items here, and I used them in soft, what I felt were comforting colors throughout all the little zones, which I hoped would give this whole studio space a sense of consistency. Inside, there's a little kitchenette where someone could make breakfast or a late night snack or whatever they want, really. There's also a small seating area for relaxing or reading. There's a sleeping area, of course, with plenty of storage so everything feels neat and practical. I also included seating on the kitchen island. It's such a small touch, but I think it encourages casual conversation, and maybe it could double up as a desk space as well if we're thinking that our Sims coming back from university university to stay here, that might just be a lovely, practical, thoughtful touch to have somewhere to put a laptop computer. There's also a tiny wet room style bathroom tucked in here as well, with what I hoped would be just enough space to make it comfortable and useful without feeling too cramped. I was imagining the older child, or any visitor really, coming to this guest house and feeling like it's truly their own little corner. They can, of course, pop over to the main house anytime, but it also gives them a sense of independence and privacy, which I think is really important, especially in multi-generational families, or if you have guests who are staying for a while. I think it offers a lovely balance between connectedness and autonomy. And in that vein, I was also imagining that one day, if the parents ever feel like the main house has grown a little too lively, or maybe the stairs feel like they're too much, they might even move out here for a little peace and for better accessibility. Or maybe hoping, keeping their fingers crossed, that one of their children continues to live in the main home. It's just a little thought, but I think it adds so much story and dimension and heart to this space. Another thought I've just had as well, maybe you could even think about renting it out, possibly, because it does have everything that Sims need in here, so they wouldn't necessarily have to come into the main house unless you wanted them to. That could be another fun little gameplay option as well. Let me know, how do you think you would use this container guest home? There really are so many possibilities, and I think that's what makes designing these smaller, tucked away spaces so much fun. And speaking of spaces tucked away, I cannot wait to show you what we did with the gym. I'll admit, this space does become a bit of a personal playground for the family. And just like with the guest house, this container has its own little story to tell. How it interacts with the main home, how the family uses it, maybe, possibly, even a few little surprises along the way. I like to think that it became a little sanctuary for movement and creativity and energy. I wanted to make it feel sophisticated and yet playful, a space where the family could work out however they liked, whether that's stretching on a yoga mat, or hitting the punching bag after a difficult day, or lifting weights, or even doing a cardio session. We have a treadmill in here if that's their jam. I tried to choose a flooring that looked like a soft rubber surface, durable to handle all kinds of activity, but also comfortable underfoot for stretching or floor exercises or for yoga. The color palette, it's warm and it's inviting. It's these lovely earthy browns with pops of oranges and just a hint of bluish green on the floor to give the room both energy and calm. Along one wall, I added these lovely full-length mirrors, which not only make the space feel larger, but also help reflect the light and keep the energy nice and bright. There's a TV tucked in here if you wanted to follow along with a workout video, and they have access to music so they can play whatever it is that gets their blood pumping and their spirits lifted. I also included a few small practical touches like towels and tissues, things that make the space feel lived in and truly functional. I really enjoyed how this room strikes a balance. It's playful enough to feel fun and personable, and yet it's somehow still structured and inviting, making it a space that the family actually wants to use. I could just imagine choosing my own workout, taking a pause to breathe, or even letting my imagination wander as I move, free from distractions out here. If it was your space, what would you add to make a gym like this feel completely your own? Now we're back. We're revisiting the kids' bathroom after I got that all out of my system. And I have to say, I think sometimes bathrooms for kids or guests are treated as less important. I don't know if you feel that way too, but I think for these parents, they really care about how their children feel in this space. I wonder if they might have even let the kids have a hand in designing a part of it themselves, letting them add little personal touches that make it feel like it's truly theirs. So with that in mind, for this bathroom, I wanted to create a space that reflected both of the children's personalities. For the youngest, I brought in these gentle ocean blues, a nod to their love of the sea and all things Sulani. These are island living cabinets as well, as a gentle little nod to that. And for the older child, I introduced subtle mid-century touches, keeping the space playful but mature, a little grown up without feeling too serious. As I say, I did did use the island living counters, and I tried really hard to resist my urge to go with the light brown swatch because I use it all the time. But honestly, I just couldn't help it. There's something about it that feels so warm and grounding. And I think that sandy color also appeals to both children, tying together their two very different personalities in one harmonious space. One of my favorite moments in here is the high windows that let you glimpse the rocks outside. It's so dramatic and unexpected, and it gives the bathroom a completely different perspective from the rest of the house. I really love how it frames nature while still feeling private and cozy, giving the kids their own little world within the home. Now it's the big reveal, the lighting choice I finally went with for the kids' hallway. And as I say, I am so excited about it. I went for these floor lights from the Spa Day kit, and what I love about them is how playful and practical they are at the same time. They sit right down on the floor, so they don't take up any space in this small hallway, and you can actually walk over them without a second thought. It's just a little touch that feels whimsical and playful for these kids, but also incredibly functional, because the moment I placed them, the whole hallway felt brighter and more inviting. And it just got me thinking, it's amazing how lighting can transform a space, especially in a hallway that might otherwise feel like it's just a passage. But I thought these lights give the kids a sense of fun and energy, making it their own special zone within the home. I also really love the way these floor lights interact with the walls and the blue tile I used down here. The glow somehow highlights the textures and the colors, giving the hallway depth and personality. It's a small detail, but sometimes those are the ones that really bring a space to life. And I think the best part, it's easy to imagine how the children might feel walking around here at night, safe and cozy and maybe a little bit excited even, like the lights are leading them to their own special adventure. So I think what I'm trying to say is it's playful, it's practical, it's perfectly suited to a space that's all about children living comfortably. It's creative, and it's also a joyful little moment in the house. Rocks might seem like a small, simple detail, but to me, I always think that they really help to ground a space. They give it this lovely texture and depth and maybe even a little personality. As I'm placing these rocks around the lot, I always try to think about the story that they're telling, not just how they look. I love imagining how Sims might interact with them. Maybe one of the parents will stop for a quiet moment, leaning on one while they watch the world go by. Even pets, they might explore these little nooks, making the landscape feel really alive. When it comes to landscaping in The Sims, I like to mix sizes, grouping rocks in odd numbers, layering them with plants and flowers to create a real natural, effortless look. And I think it's these little touches that can make a garden or a backyard feel really lived in. It's like it's been shaped over time rather than just dropped in from BIMO by me a few minutes ago. I also like to think how rocks frame a view. Maybe they can guide the eye towards a pathway or a certain spot, maybe a little tree, something really pretty. It's almost like setting up these little vignettes for the Sims to discover and enjoy as they wander through the space. And I know I talk about rocks in almost every video. It really is one of my favorite things. But I think one thing that I haven't spoken about before to do with the rocks is how versatile they are. They could mark a boundary, they could hide a trash bin, maybe they could even create a playful little obstacle course for our Sims. And while I'm placing each one here, I like to reflect on how these small, natural elements bring a sense of calm and connection to the space. For me, it's almost like a mini meditation as I build. I do find it really relaxing, even when it's going not entirely to plan. So I'd love to hear from you. Do you have a favorite way to use rocks or natural details in your Sims builds? Or maybe you have a favorite spot on your lot where a little rock could change everything. It's just so much fun to think about the stories and the little adventures that these simple elements can inspire. So as we finish placing these rocks and shaping the landscape, I can't help but think about how the choices we make in a home can reflect the way we want to live. And here in this container home, for example, it's not just about how the house looks, but it's also about the way it supports the family and even the world around it, because that was such an important consideration for our Sims when they were building this house. They really loved this spot, and the landscape was just as important to them as the home itself. So that's why I wanted to bring in a few little touches that nod to sustainability. We have some solar panels up on the roof, a wind turbine down below here. They're practical, yes, yes, but to me, and I think to us Sims as well, they offer a kind of quiet magic. They make the home feel alive in an entirely different way. It's like working with nature and not against it. And I love how these elements influence the feel of the whole home too. They hint at a thoughtful lifestyle, one that balances creativity with fun and mindfulness. And just like the containers themselves, repurposed and layered with history, these eco-friendly choices remind me that a home can be full of character while still being gentle to the world. And as I'm looking at this home now, I feel invited to imagine what my own version of this could be. Maybe it's solar, maybe it's a garden that grows your own food, maybe it's something that we haven't even thought of yet. But I think the point is that each choice can feel intentional and playful and still a little bit magical as well. So if this inspires you in the same way that it inspires me, I'd love to hear what little touches would you add to this home to make it feel yours while also honoring the world around you as well. One thing I personally love about this particular spot in Brindleton Bay is that it's somehow grounded and whimsical all at once. And it feels so alive and warm, and I think a lot of that is due to the cats and the dogs that frequent these spots. And now, as I'm shaping these spaces and they're all coming together, I can't help but imagine all the little visitors who might love this home as much as the family does. Maybe there are a few stray cats that seem to wander through the garden, drawn to the flowers and the sun-draped corners. There are so many little nooks here that would be perfect for a cat nap. And I love thinking about how these unexpected guests could become part of the story through gameplay. Maybe the family decides to adopt one or two or even a whole little crew of furry friends. There's something so heartwarming about imagining them exploring the yard, curling up in the sunlight, maybe following the children as they dash from one container to another. And maybe they even become constant companions, maybe for the youngest child sharing in a seashell hunt or something like that. Maybe another might claim the roof of the guest house as their little domain. So for anyone who decides to play in this phase, it's just an invitation, but let me know. Is this a storyline that feels inspiring to you? Or maybe you want to take the family in another direction? Also, Brindleton Bay, it's a place that's rich with story. I can imagine my Sims building this place and then wandering down to the Salty Paw Saloon after a long day of hammering and painting, or maybe pausing by the anchor statue. And that's what I find so magical about this particular project. We're taking something so humble, even overlooked, these shipping containers, and turning them into a home with heart and soul. And so just like that, our container home in Brindleton Bay is coming to life. From the layered interiors to the playful, tucked away outdoor spaces. I love how this home tells a story, not just of the family living here, but of creativity and curiosity and care. Every corner of every container, every little detail, whether it's a half-finished book on a side table or a glowing fish tank or even a stray cat wandering through the garden, it all helps this place feel lived in and loved and full of life. If you think you might like to play here, I'm going to put it on the gallery. I'll call it Container Family Home, and you can also find all of my creations by searching for the hashtag SimsBuildsChill. If you enjoyed today's build, you might also like this tiny eco barn. It's another cozy, sustainable space with little magic details and thoughtful touches. Perfect for anyone who loves living gently with the land.